as they go along in their travels that they will come up against certain obstacles that continue to bother them, and we are going to see them murmur some. We'll see them unhappy about certain things, and how that they'll be rebuked as a result of that, because really they're wanting to go back to Egypt where they thought they had it good. They seem to have forgotten all of the rigor with which they were enslaved. But nonetheless, God has promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Judah especially now, as he is the one that receives the main series of blessings, that they would receive some things. And what were those blessings that God had promised to them? How do we refer to those?
Back to Abraham.
Yeah, right. From Abraham on down through today. Yes,
the land promise was one.
Okay, Dustin. Seed in the nation. Okay, so the land had to do with what place?
Canaan.
Canaan. Okay, and the nation had to do with what? Israel. Okay, a great people.
Oh, yeah.
And then the seed had to do with what?
Christ.
Christ coming through their seed. That's right. And so those are great blessings that were bestowed upon them. And so God is in the process of fulfilling those. And we don't want to lose sight of those blessings, because that's what was fulfilled through the nation of Israel. And what is the promise that affects us today?
Christ.
Okay?
Seed promise.
And he came through the seed promise. That's right. And so specifically, God said to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12 that through your seed all nations of the earth will be blessed. And so that's what we focus on today, because that's the way that Jesus came through the lineage of Judah. And we'll talk about that more as we go along, especially as they get established in the land, and then Judah becomes a pretty good sized nation of their own. And even especially on through the rest of the Old Testament, we find the descendants of Christ. And of course, those are listed in Matthew and Luke as well. But at this point in time, we learned that the Israelites have come out of Egypt. They have crossed over the Red Sea, and what occurred there?
Well, they crossed over on dry land, and the Egyptians were around.
Okay, all right. So they went through the Red Sea, and Moses stretched out his rod across the sea, and God said, "I'll part the waters," and he sent that east wind to do that. And they walked, as George said, walked across on dry land. And then when the Egyptians followed them in, Moses stretched his rod back from the other side, and the waters came back and killed all of the Egyptians and their horses and horsemen and all of that. So they have journeyed to a city not a city, but a area or town, I guess we might say in our vernacular, called Elim. And they encamped there. And so they're going now from Elim over into the wilderness of Zin. There are several wildernesses that we will see, and we'll look at just a few moments. We'll look at a map that we've seen before of this general area, and there's the way of Shur that goes up into the hill country of Judea, which was a trade route. There was the way of the sea, which went through the Philistines, but Moses didn't take the people through either one of those, because God said they're not ready for battle yet. And so he brought them out into the wilderness, and this is the first wilderness they come to, the wilderness of Zin. The wilderness, let's start, and I've got that wrong in the title there. That should be the wilderness of sin and not Zin. We'll talk about Zin later. But this is the wilderness of sin. The wilderness of sin was nearest to what mountain?
Sinai.
Sinai, okay. So that was very important. We'll learn in Exodus chapter 20, hopefully in a couple of classes, Lord willing. But that's the place where the people received, or Moses received what?
Ten Commandments.
10 Commandments, and the Lord began to give the law to him. Okay. All right, so the wilderness of Sin was located between Elim and Mount Sinai, as Exodus 16 and verse 1 tells us, and they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. 15th day of the second month. When did all this business, this departure from Egypt, begin?
You want to know the month?
Sure.
About around April, somewhere in there. That's when the Passover is celebrated, I think.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I guess when you said month, I was thinking in number. The first month, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it started in the first month, which would be between our March and April. And so the first month, and what happened on the 10th day of that month?
After the first.
Not on the 10th day. On the 10th day, what was prepared, Bill?
They were preparing for the Passover.
Okay, they were to start preparing for the Passover, and the Passover was centered around what animal? A lamb. Okay, a kid of the goats or a lamb. A yearling, spotless. And so they were to take that kid of the goats or lamb, and they would put it up on the 10th day of the month, right? And then, what was the next important day? Remember?
Passover.
Right, but what day of the month was that? 14th day of the month. Okay, the 14th day of the month in the evening, they were to prepare the Passover, and they were to eat it. And you remember how that they were to keep their clothes on. All of their clothes were to be on. With their outer cloak and everything, girded up with their shoes on, ready to get out. So this is, really the institution of the Passover, when they put the blood over the lintel and the doorpost, and the angel, the destroyer, came and he passed over them. So then they left out of Exodus. And of course, that 14th day of the month not only was the Passover, but it also began what feast?
Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so those are 2 or 3 important things to remember. All right, so from the 14th day of the first month, when they left Egypt in the middle of the night, Pharaoh rose up and heard all the cries, and he summoned Moses and Aaron, and he said, "Get out." And so they left in the middle of the night on the 14th. And they went and crossed the Red Sea. They went over to Elim, came down to the wilderness of Sin, and now it's the second month, and the 15th day. So how long have they been out of Egypt? A month and a day. Right. And so they arrived in the wilderness. And so now this is not the first time they murmured to Moses, is it? And so here now, they have come to the wilderness of Sin, and they begin to remember what?
Flesh pots in Egypt.
Yeah, the flesh pots in Egypt where they ate and bread to the full and all that. And it was almost like, it sounds almost like it was a vacation for them, the way they described that. But that was not the way it was. So there's a little bit of exaggeration here on the part of the Israelites, isn't there? All right, so in verse 2 of Exodus 16, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the sons of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And again, as we talked about last Sunday, maybe since this generation didn't know freedom, they really didn't understand what they had. And so then in verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven." So I made the point here that a month and a day out of Egypt, all they can remember were the flesh pots. They don't remember how God passed over them.
Right.
They don't remember how that they were brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. How that they left with more goods than they could carry. The Egyptians had blessed them, and they had really, had really routed Egypt of all the material blessings that they had brought out. So later on, as we see them begin to put together things for the tabernacle, we wonder, how did they get all of this? Well, it came from Egypt. Jewels of silver, gold, raiment, other such things. And so all we can remember are the flesh pots. And so those complaints came. They complained about starving to death. They said Moses and Aaron had brought them out to die of hunger. But here God is teaching them. He's teaching them to rely upon Him. He's teaching them what faith is. And when is it that we learn the most? When everything's going right for us? When we think that we've made all the right decisions and we've brought ourselves to the place where we're doing so wonderful? That's not the time when we learn the greatest faith, is it?
No.
Our greatest time of learning faith is when things are going bad, when things are difficult. And then we begin to understand and we begin to see that God's teaching us and we need to rely upon Him. Because it's not us that directs us, is it? We don't direct our own steps. We don't lead ourselves in the way. It is God that leads us. Oh, we can. We can lead ourselves in the way, and we'll get ourselves in trouble, and then all of a sudden we'll start crying and say, why has God done this to me? When we're the ones that did it to ourselves. We're our own worst enemies. Believe me, I have learned that. I have learned that I'm my own worst enemy. I have learned that when I try to do things, when I think I'm in charge, then that's when I get brought down. It doesn't keep me from making mistakes, unfortunately. I don't learn much better than the Israelites learned. But we try to keep that in mind. We try to grow thereby. And so God rains bread from heaven. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Okay, so here the Lord's saying, I'm going to give them bread. I'm going to rain it down from heaven. But there are some stipulations in connection with that bread, aren't there? He tells them that you're going to gather as much as you can eat in a day. You're going to gather that every day for 5 days. On the 6th day, you're going to gather twice as much. And he said, if you gather more than you can eat in a day, then what's going to happen the next morning if you try to save it?
It'll be spoiled.
Yeah, it'll be spoiled. Worms will eat it. And so immediately he says, I'm going to test their faith to see if they can follow my instructions. You ever tried to put together something based on a set of instructions? If you follow that step by step and the instructions are good, then you come out with a good product, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you order something from Temu and you get a set of instructions that you really can't understand, and this is not just Temu, this is everywhere, Amazon, wherever you get it. Whatever store you frequent here in town. And if it's made in another country and you get those instructions and you're looking at those instructions and they're no good, then that doesn't help you much, does it? No. And you wind up with a mess. Absolutely. Well, that's Israel. See, they got the instructions that based on what they think, what is best for them, and they're not the right instructions. So they wind up with a mess. So let's read a little further. Beginning in verse 5, it says, and it will come about on the 6th day when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily, So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? So people are going to go out in the morning. They're going to collect a day's portion. Collect that every day. As we mentioned, on the sixth day, they were gathered twice as much as a day's portion. Yes, Justin.
I don't believe that law is in place yet, but did they do that on the sixth day out of preparation for what will be the Sabbath?
Yes, and I was just going to mention that. We're going to learn why they gather twice as much on the sixth day here in just a second. And so Jehovah brought bread in the morning, and he brought quail in the evening. And so, as we continue to read in verse 8, Moses said, this will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. And so what was their complaint? And back there in Egypt, we had bread to the what? Bread to the full, right? And so now he says, the Lord is going to provide you bread to the full in the morning. Who really provided for them in Egypt?
God.
God always.
That's right. They thought, oh, this was something that somebody else did. You've forgotten us. You just recently become our God. But that's not the case. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. And so twice Moses and Aaron remind the people, you're not complaining against us. You're not complaining against us because we brought you out here to starve to death. You're complaining against the Lord because he's the one that's leading you out of captivity, out of slavery. And it came about, well, verse 9, and Moses said to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings. And it came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Now, what cloud is this that we're talking about here?
Well, the pillar that lifts them out in the daytime.
Okay. All right, so the Lord, this is the pillar of cloud that the Lord guided them about in the daytime, George says. And that's right. And how did he guide them at the nighttime?
Pillar of fire.
Pillar of fire. Okay, and so they saw the presence of the Lord there in that pillar of cloud. And how long was that there? How long was it present?
I guess until he came out into the land.
That's right. It was every day, every night, for as long as they were in the wilderness until they came into the land.
At least 40 years.
40 years, right. And so God's presence was continually with them. Yet, instead of looking to the glory of God in this cloud or in this pillar of fire, they thought, well, maybe we ought to do it this way.
Yeah.
So let's read a little further. In verse 11, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So, as we have just read, and what you see on the screen, Jehovah brought bread in the morning, quail in the evening. He tells them, you're not murmuring. Moses and Aaron tell them, you're not murmuring against us, but against Jehovah. And so Aaron calls this congregation together near to Jehovah, and Jehovah speaks to them. So verse 13, it came about in the evening that the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. Not dissimilar to what we may have seen yesterday in those snow flurries. It will have looked something similar to that, but you know the frost on the ground, and how sometimes the frost is pretty thick, and you can go out there and you can step on it and it'll crunch down. You see that? That's kind of what this was. That's what it appeared to be. So as Aaron called them, they saw the glory of Jehovah in the cloud, and Jehovah told Moses that indeed he would provide bread in the morning and quail in the evening. And so evening brought forth quail. Morning brought forth manhu, as is stated here in our information that the Waldrons have put together for us. M-A-N-H-U. We call that manna. What is it? They'd never seen anything like that before. It's like, I guess, seeing rain for the first time. Or maybe seeing snow for the first time. And we know what snow is because people told us about snow, but if we didn't, and we saw it fall on the ground, we said, what is that? That's what they said. What is it? That's where we get the word manna. And so, again, Jehovah tells them not to gather more than they can use in that day. Some didn't obey. They gathered too much. And the manna bred worms and stunk. Moses was angry that they did not obey. I just have to tell you, this reminds me of a modern day thing that we have going on in our country. Lots of people, for whatever reason, I'm not placing blame or anything of that nature, are in situations where they don't seem to have the clothes they need or maybe the food they need. And so they'll rely upon others and maybe even the government to provide for them. And occasionally you'll find a religious group or some kind of organization that will have this day where they'll say, come meet us at this place. We're giving away food, clothing, and whatever you may need. I have seen on many occasions people that would quote unquote qualify for that kind of help would gather and they would fill their cars to the full, and they would go home and they would take all this stuff out of their houses and they would pile it up in the floor, and they might go the next week to another place and they'd gather all that and they'd pile it up in the floor, and they'd go somewhere else the next week and they'd gather all that and they'd pile it up in the floor. And before you know it, you've got a situation like this with Israel. And I'm not saying that all people that are in need do that. Please don't misunderstand me. But I have personally seen them. You go to their house, and it is this deep in stuff. And so that's the way we are sometimes. We think, oh, if it's free, it's for me. I want 3. And so that's what we do. And in this case, rather than relying upon the Lord and His instruction, they said, we're going to gather what we can gather and gather it quickly and hoard it up. Next morning it bred worms and it stunk. Rather than following the instructions that are given, take what you need and leave the rest for someone else. They took more than what they could stand. Yes, George?
I just have to say Matthew 6:33.
Yes. The Lord does provide for us. But our problem is that, well, you know, if I don't hoard this stuff up, then I might not have it later. Well, that's not faith, is it? No, it's not. God has provided for us, and He has told us if we will follow Him, that He'll take care of us. Now, I don't want you to read anything into what I said other than what I said. Because there are many people, well-deserving people, that need someone to help them. But there are many others that hoard and take what others would need. And so it was in this case. And so they disobeyed. And Moses was angry with that. And so I want to remind us by going back to verse 4 and read that again. Exodus 16 and verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. So let's make a little bit of illustration to us. God tests us not through, bringing great calamities on us because he thinks maybe we have sinned. But he tests us by asking us to follow his instruction in the Word of God. And if we don't follow that instruction in the Word of God, then what are the consequences of that?
We won't have what we need, or our plans will fail.
Right. Our plans will fail. We won't have what we need. Sin, basically, is the general answer to that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And so, putting aside, and I know I've used this illustration here, of course, but putting aside that illustration and thinking specifically about what God wants us to do in his Word, tells us to do, how we are to please him, what we are to do for our fellow man, what we are to do and worship to him. If we sidetrack any of that instruction and we do it the way we want to do it, then there are going to be consequences for that. Bill?
There's going to be people on the day of judgment that's going to look Jesus in the eye and say, my way was better, your way wasn't good enough.
And that's basically what we say, isn't it? When whatever we do, we say, oh, I know what the Bible says, but that's not the direction he would have us to take. Okay, so here we come to the answer to Dustin's question just a moment ago. On the sixth day, Moses gave them instruction to cook and lay up for the next day, which was going to be a holy Sabbath for Jehovah. A holy Sabbath for Jehovah. In verse 22, now it came about on the sixth day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, This is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observant, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning. So what does Sabbath mean?
A day of rest.
Okay, it's a day of rest taken on what day? The 7th. Okay. And so this holy Sabbath would be a holy day of rest consecrated to God. You recall how that when he established the Passover and specifically the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that he said the 14th day and the 21st day will be a holy convocation. Now those days didn't always fall on the Sabbath day, okay? So I don't want to confuse you by saying that, but this idea of holy convocation is a gathering of the people together, a worshiping of God, a sacrifice to him of that day. We're not going to work on that day. All the work was prepared, all done and prepared for on the 6th day. So we've got our food prepared already. We don't have to work for that. We've got everything done that we need to do that enables us to have this day of rest. And so, if you will, the Sabbath was a holy convocation to the Lord. And so they, verse 24 says, they put it aside until morning as Moses had ordered, and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. Now, on the first day, some of them gathered too much. They gathered maybe enough for 2 or 3 days, but it bred worms and stunk. Why did this not?
Because God made it that way.
Okay. The first day was against God's will, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 7th day was in connection with God's will, obeying God's will. And so there's the difference.
Obedience to God.
There's the difference. Yes, submitting to God, receiving the test and passing that test by following His will. And so there would be nothing to gather on the seventh day. Well, here again, guess what happened? Jehovah saw that some tried to gather on the seventh day. Here is a case of that doesn't apply to me. Jehovah says, gather twice as much on the sixth day so that you'll be able to have some left over for the seventh day and you'll have something to eat. Oh, that doesn't apply to me. I've got things to do. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to gather on the sixth day, and then surely the Lord will understand and He'll provide for me on the seventh day. That wasn't the way it worked out, was it?
No.
How many times have we said that to ourselves? Surely the Lord won't mind. Here's a clear statement. Clear and applicable statement. Surely the Lord won't mind. Surely the Lord... Well, you know, it's just one day. I mean, next week, I'll gather twice as much on the sixth day. But this is just one day. The Lord won't mind just one day. How many times have you heard that? I have had others to say to me, hey, we've got this thing going on. Well, I understand. I won't be able to be there because I want to assemble with the saints on that day. Yeah, but surely the Lord won't mind you missing just one day. I don't know if y'all have heard that, but I have. And so here is something that we think doesn't apply to us. And that's just one illustration. And so Jehovah says, how long? How long are the people going to cease to obey me? Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So then he gives us an explanation of what manna is like. Down at the end of the chapter, let's look at verse 30. So the people rested on the seventh day, and the house of Israel named it manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers and honey. That'd be pretty nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. I take a little bit of honey every morning, and sometimes the honey that I get locally is just the sweetest. It depends on time of year. It's just the sweetest, but this latter portion that I've gotten, it's got just a little bit of a wang to it. It's fresh. Not sure about what caused all of that, but just a little bit of a wang. But these wafers and honey, sweet and delicate. And so it's like almost kind of like a dessert, really sounds like to me. And then he gave them quail to eat as well. And so he describes that, how it tasted like wafers and honey. And Moses said, this is what the Lord commanded, let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I kept you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said, take a jar and put an omer full of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. And the sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is a tenth beneath. So reckon what happened to that omer of manna? You think the next day or two that it bred worms and stuff?
No.
It didn't, did it? Because God made it that way. He wanted that to be kept and established for all to see. In the coming generations, they would see that this is what God fed our family in the wilderness while they were there on their way to Canaan land. It's interesting here that Moses refers to the 40 years. 40 years haven't even been established yet, have they?
No.
And we'll talk about that later on, but Moses, in writing this, refers to the 40 years. And so if we didn't know already that they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years because of disobedience, that would make no sense to us. Because we would say, did it take them 40 years to get there? Certainly not. But because of disobedience, it did. All right, here's our map. So you see up in the northwest corner, Lower Egypt, that's the Nile Delta, Goshen there, just south of that area. And this black line to the top of the map, that's the way of the way of the sea, or the way of the Philistines. That middle black line is the way of Shur. And then that lower black line is the traditional way of the desert, if you will. That would have gone from Goshen over to the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, where Ezion-Geber was. And the red line is the traditional route, what most people think, most conservative scholars think, the route that the people of Israel took. And we went through a week or so ago about how there were two different routes that are thought to be the routes of the Exodus. It really doesn't matter to us because we can't go back and pinpoint those little camping places anyway. But we go by what the scriptures tell us. And so, as you see, that red line comes down along the Gulf of Suez down to the wilderness of Sin. And the Sinai Peninsula is marked out for us there. That is where Mount Sinai is in that region. And Mount Horeb is also the same as Mount Sinai. And so we'll learn about that as we go along before too much longer. All right, so Jehovah commanded Israel to leave the wilderness of Sin. Chapter 17, it tells us that they were to go by their journeys. The King James translation doesn't mention that. It just says that they journeyed from this point to this point. The New American Standard Translation, the American Standard Translation, the English Standard Translation refer to them journeying by their journeys or journeying by stages. And so that gives us the indication that they went forth as an orderly group of peoples, and they were separated into groups. It also indicates to us that they went forward as a great people. In other words, it wasn't just, you take your family and you just walk out through the desert. They were in stages, they were set apart in groups of people, and they were a great people. And so you have to have order. You see, in the infantry, in the army, infantrymen are drilled how to march. And they don't do that just to get you in shape. That's part of the matter. But the other part is that you do it orderly so that when your company moves, or your battalion moves, or however you're split apart, then you move and you listen to the cadence. And when the cadence stops, you stop. And so it was with the people of Israel. They went out by journeys or by stages. And that's the only way to carry out a mass move of people like that, is orderly. So according to archaeologists, this would have been a dry trek through rough country. I read some information that stated that part of this traveling, this journey, it was very narrow passes, some 200 to 300 meters wide. So that's, 600-900 feet wide, something like that. So to take such a large group of people through there. How many men do we know that there were? 600,000, right. So plus women and children. So to take that company through there, they had to go through very orderly. And so they came to Rephidim, one day's journey from Sinai. where there was no water. And so guess what happens?
They complain.
They complain. That's right. They complain. The people began to strive with Moses and Aaron, and they said, "Give us water that we may drink." And after what they had been through, and after the murmurings and the grumblings, "Oh, I wish I was back in Egypt. You brought us out here to die. We haven't got anything to eat," yada, yada, yada. The Lord provides for them. He provided for them before. He provided for them then. He provides for them now. So Moses is very angry, and he speaks to the Lord about it. But before we get to that, let's look at the first two verses of chapter 17. Then all the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin, according to the command of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, "Why now have you brought us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do to this people? A little more, and they will stone me." So the people continue to murmur to Moses about this. "We've been brought out here to die." Moses cries out to Jehovah, "What am I going to do with this people?" Jehovah said, "Take the elders and stand before the people at the stone of Horeb." Now, I don't know where the stone of Horeb was. I don't know if that's something the Israelites set up, or maybe travelers in the past had set up to guide the way. But they went to this stone, and the Lord said unto Moses, "Smite the rock that the people may drink." Now you'll notice that I've got smite in bold letters, italicized and underlined. On this occasion, the Lord says smite. So we'll remember that as we go along. Smite the rock, and the people may drink. And so Moses smites the rock, and water came forth. Man, I'd love to sing that. Can you imagine what that would have been like for water to come out of that rock? It's like a fountain. And the people drank from it. Now, again, how many people was it? How many men?
600,000.
600,000. And the Lord gives them water out of a rock. Now, we sometimes just pass over this and say, "Well, I'd love to have seen that. Wouldn't it have been great to have been there?" And never once think about how long it takes to water families upon families upon families, and cattle upon cattle upon cattle. So God provided for that. I don't know if there was anything miraculous involved in this other than the fact that God brought forth water from the rock. I mean, that's enough, isn't it? But how they could have watered that many people, give them something to drink, in the amount of time that they stayed there. We're really not told that. It's a wonderful thing to contemplate, because we know that God provided for them. But it wasn't just done like that. People had to come and get their water, and others had to wait. And there may have been some grumbling even about that. "Well, here I am last in line. My name starts with W. That's the worst thing ever." You know? So he called the place Massa, which means temptation, and Meribah, which means striving. And because they tempted Jehovah, saying, "Is he with us or not?" Now here's the cloud, the pillar of cloud back here. God's guiding them in the pillar of fire at night, and they're wanting to know if he's with us or not. And modern day, here's the Word of God. And we want to know, why did he do that to us? Is he with us or not? So here, it just seems out of the blue that the Amalekites come. Now, do you remember the connection that Abraham had years before with the Amalekites? The head of the Amalekites, Amalek,
Yes.
and
Esau's
Abraham,
son.
and Abraham
Yes.
were people who got along.
Right.
A little bit later on, Isaac had to continue digging wells because they kept covering his wells up. And so they become a people that, you know, we're not related anymore. We just got our own nation here, and you're not going to get in on what we have provided or what's in our boundary. Actually, Abraham had dug the wells first. And so the first physical conflict that occurs is with Amalek. Israel's an untrained people in warfare. It may very well be that they've gained some faith in the wilderness already, because the scriptures do not tell us anything about them grumbling or complaining. Maybe they needed a cause that was at hand. I don't know. But whatever the case, the men that Joshua, this is our first mention of Joshua, I think. Here Joshua chooses out men that are going to be in battle. And so Joshua comes and chooses these men to fight against Amalek, and there's no more murmuring, or at least no record of that. This was an unprovoked attack by Amalek, according to what Moses tells us later. Let's turn to Deuteronomy 25 real quick. Deuteronomy 25, and we'll read verse 17. Deuteronomy 25 and verse 17. Miss Janice, you got that?
Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt.
Okay. I tell you what, go ahead and read verse 18 if you don't mind.
How he met thee by the way, and smote behind most of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God.
Okay. All right, so here's Amalek. It's like I don't know, it's kind of like a hyena. He's going to attack the weakest. And so back in the very back of the people of Israel, those that are struggling to continue on because of age and illness, he fights at them. And then Moses says, Joshua, prepare us men. And they go out. Moses and Aaron and Hur, Hur was a son of Judah. I think this is the first time we've heard of Hur. H-U-R. Went to the top of the hill. And the Lord said, as long as Moses holds his staff up, Israel will prevail. If the staff comes down, then Amalek will prevail. And so, over a period of time during the battle, Moses began to get weak, and the staff began to droop. And so Aaron and Hur got a stone for him to sit on, and they each stood on one side and the other, and they held his arms up, and Israel prevailed. What did the Lord do for Israel on that day?
He fought for them.
He fought for them.
They were not warriors, they were slaves.
That's right. And so here, all of these men that Joshua had assembled together were really just men that were saying, I'll go. Don't know anything about battle, but I'll go. I'll go. I'll defend my country. I'll defend my family. I'll defend this people that God has brought out into the wilderness. And they did. And they prevailed. And they prevailed at the hand of God. And so as we continue over in chapter 17, I want to look down to verse 13. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book, in a memorial, and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, The Lord is my banner. And he said, the Lord has sworn, and the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation. And so the scripture tells us that Joshua was valiant. He was a man that was willing to lead these people out. Joshua was not a man who was a warrior, but he had faith in God. And God led them about and gave them victory, so much that it was said that Joshua smote Amalek with the sword. Write this as a memorial in a book. Recite it to Joshua so he may know. And this was going to prepare Joshua for days later and years later when he will eventually lead the people into the land of Canaan. He will be a mighty man of valor as a result of that. And the Lord promised that Amalek will be utterly destroyed, and we will fight them generation after generation until they're gone. So Moses built that altar called Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah has sworn. Or as this translation says, and I've lost my place here, the Lord is my banner. Okay. Any questions or comments about what we've talked about thus far? Murphy?
A little bit of application for God providing manna for the children of Israel. Real practical application. New Testament in the model prayer, Matthew 6:11, he said, told them to pray, give us this day our daily bread. Literally, that's day by day.
Yes.
So, we don't want to think, well, God's got to give me the bread for a whole week. No, every day. And so when we sit down to eat, and as I do at home, and we say our blessing, we say, I thank you, or thank thee for this food. Food what? He's provided for us that day. And like you talked about, God is teaching us faith. He's teaching us dependence upon Him. And my wife and I went through a situation where I was suddenly fired by a congregation in Coleman County. And I had only so much money to depend on while I looked for another place. And that was when I was literally learning to trust in God and to have faith. And there was a dear lady in that congregation who knew me and knew my wife and knew the difficulty. And I was using the money as best I could. And one day, though, I come out, and on the hood of my car, there's food laid for me. Mm-hmm. And the Lord provided even through my bread.
Absolutely. Jeremy, I think one of the things, I'll get to you in just a minute, I think one of the things that we forget is that God does take care of us and provide for us day by day.
Yes.
And we really don't understand how overwhelmingly we have been blessed, because I don't know, there may be some, I would be surprised to find out this is the case, that there would be some of this congregation that literally only has a day's food in their house. I'd be very surprised if any of us were in that. You know, we might have, we might say, well, I've got to go to the grocery store tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the Lord has provided us with what we need to go to the grocery store tomorrow and get what we need. And
that's right.
In other words, we're not hungry. But if we understand that the Lord provides that each day, no matter what we might have stored up at the house, He has provided that as well. And so when that day comes that we consume whatever we have there, and then we go and get more. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes we rely upon ourselves to do that rather than having the faith and understanding that God's really the one that's given us that.
Uh-huh.
And that, you know, that may be a little confusing to you, but what I'm trying to say is that He provides us day by day, even though we may have it stacked this high in the pantry. John.
Couldn't you also say that Christ is our bread of life that comes from heaven, from John 3:16?
Yeah, He is the bread of life.
Yes,
John chapter 6, verse 31, rather.
yes, John 6.
George, you have a
I'm
comment?
just gonna say, I've talked personally to people, they think God has nothing to do with him having a job, having good health, and having provided for them. They never think of it. And it's something for us to think about.
Right. He provides rain to the just and the unjust.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much.